today we're going to talk about the CSV driver. The CSV driver performs two basic functions. It imports CSV and it exports CSV. And CSV is how this driver started. However, it can import CSV. The delimiting character can be, the pipe character. We can do fixed length fields. So we had a customer who was importing movie times from their movie theater ticketing system, and it outputted it in a printer-friendly way. So each column had a fixed number of characters, and the customer was able to pull in that data to automate the theater lighting and things like that. So that's what the fixed length import is. And there's also an XML import. It's pretty advanced, and we'll talk about that at another time. So your imports here are you have the CSV import, and then there's file, which pulls CSV files from the file system. URL will pull them from any URL on the web, a web app. It makes an HTTP request. However, it's not limited to HTTP, but I've never seen anyone do anything other than that. There is FTP as well. That's just another internet scheme, but there's a dedicated import object for that. Let's go take a look at the a file import. That's the easiest one to demo with, although I'll show you something cool with like a URL import in just a little bit. So the CSV file import, you do first you set up where you're going to pull your file from. All right, so that is here. And you can also put in formatting, right? So I could say time. When I save that, you'll see it put the date in there, all right? And the facets for resolving this are right here, and that's the time format. And the documentation goes through all the characters that you can use for formatting time. That's actually used far more extensively in the export portion of the driver, which we'll cover last. So once you have set up where you're pulling your file from, then the next thing you do is you define the columns that you want to take out of it. So this columns object, double click on it, and I've already brought in the fields, but you would do a discover of the document. And you know what? I didn't do one thing. I've already pre-configured this. The skip first and rows starts off as 0. All right. We're going to change that back to 1 after we've discovered everything. So if I discover again, you'll see that it gets the headers. Now this is always confusing because you think of a CSV document as oriented the same way as this table is. However, we're taking each row and we're going to turn them into properties on an object. So they go from being horizontally oriented to vertically oriented. And so in your discovery, this is the header row, this is the next row in the file, and so forth. And it only brings in 8 rows of the file to help you get an idea of what the contents of this document are. All right. So, if you want to bring in your building, okay, you just click and add it. Now, if there's a timestamp, all right, let's say you want to pull the timestamp from one of the columns in the file. You're going to add it. You're going to say it's a timestamp column, and you're going to name it timestamp, just like this, which is how Niagara labels the field in its history records, and it's a frozen slot in the in this driver, which I'll show you shortly. So name it timestamp, and this is how the timestamp from within the file is going to be used to assign timestamps to the data you import and archive to the database. Also, you can specify your time format here. And once again, the 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 documentation covers what all of these characters are and how you can format time. So you you define the rows that you care about, that you want to bring in. Then you need to skip the rows of non-data. Usually there's a few rows in the beginning of a document that are non-data. In this case, there's one header row. And I'll tell you what, I'll show you what the file looks like real quick. So here it is. And it's really simple demonstration. I've been using this file since 2009. So we've defined that. And the easiest thing that gets done is the trending of the records coming from the file. So when a file is pulled or polled, all right, each row is processed, and you'll see on this source object there's a property for each of the columns that we have defined or discovered. There's also this timestamp. That's a frozen slot. Even before we bring in any of the columns, this exists. And if you don't define a timestamp column, the time of the poll is inserted into here. Not every data source is going to have timestamps. You'll have a system that's just producing a CSV document, and you're polling it at an interval, and the time of the poll will be used as the timestamp. So every row basically passes through this source object. And I'll demonstrate how, as every row is parsed from the incoming document, all the values are shoved in here. It's not something you can watch or put on the graphic because the changes fly by so fast. But what instead you're going to do is you're going to want to add some CSV history extensions. There's some convenience functions here to do that, to add a history extension, an alarm extension. There's a nice trend all right? So what that does is add a history extension for every one of the properties. Now let's take a look at history extension. First of all, they're not going to come in enabled, so you're going to change that. And you specify where the timestamp comes from, and it normally comes from that timestamp property. However, it could come from other properties. And then you have where the value comes from. Now this was pre-configured because we said trend all. Then the same thing with your history device and your history name. So under your histories, your history device is something like the local station, and if you're on a supervisor, you have other device objects, right? And you can create your own history device if you want, and it'll create another object up here. The history name, you can put in a format, and if you say dynamic history is true, every single row it's going to go to trend. It's going to re-resolve this. So it's a performance hit, but if you have a file coming in that has multiple histories contained within it, let's say you're bringing in a file with the billing data from multiple buildings, and you want to assign the values to a history representing each unique building. That's an example of where you would do this. So you define the history device and the history name. The rest of this is normal Niagara stuff. You could trend on an interval, so you could be polling frequently, but only trending every 15 minutes or so. Most common case is on changes of value. So every single row that passes through these fields here, a COV event would occur, and you could create a history record. And that's what we'll do in just a second. Then there's a few extra properties, ignoring null values, duplicate timestamps, or duplicate record is where the timestamp and the value are equal. So in this case, it ignores duplicate records, but if you have two rows with the same timestamp but different values, they would both get put into the history. And then there's sometimes where you pull in some data and it's older than what's currently in the database. You're re-importing something, and this will actually clear the entire history and start it clean again. So if we enable this, and then we go, let's get a better look, and pull the file. All right, so we don't have any faults. 3 rows were processed. You can see these have a value, all right, but that represents the last row in the file. The more important thing will be the history that was created by this history extension. Here it is, and it has 3 rows of data in it. All right, so that is the simple use case. Sometimes, let's say a file like before has multiple buildings, or it just gets far more complex. In that case, you can use filters. So let's go look at the records. So every row that gets processed, all right, this is what in Niagara is called a topic, and you can link topics to actions and other topics. And when you do this, all right, you can link this to record in on, this is a string filter, all right, and the filter has a rule, all right, when the column building equals and the value student union. So only records where the column building equals student value will be accepted. Then the properties, which are here, building system equipment code, will get populated, all right, and a record accepted topic is fired, so you can pass the record to even more filters. So here's a timestamp filter, and you can prevent it from older time, basically to ignore older timestamps, right, and only accept timestamps coming in the future. So filters allow you to filter out records that you don't care about to pinpoint data more accurately. And then, so this record accepted is linked to a triggered Boolean. This is just a momentary. You can configure to how long it turns on. So if I pull, this should turn true. I might have to. All right, so there, it turned true. So the record came through, these values were updated, all right, and then after the timestamp filter, I had another triggered Boolean, and then also I was able to link one of those properties, the code, to a numeric writable. So filtering allows you to do pretty advanced parsing of your data. All right. Now the URL import, the only difference between the file, the URL, and the FTP import is how it goes and gets the data. The URL import, I've pointed this at Yahoo Finance. We'll get the stock quotes for Honeywell. So if we go to columns and do a discover, you'll see it's pulling it in, and there we've gotten, these are the columns that are available and the data. The interesting thing to point out is this won't actually, well, it can work and it can't work. Depends on what you're trying to do. If you're trying to get a record per day, this will work. But what happens is the timestamps are decreasing, right? So the first row has the most recent timestamp, and the second row has an older timestamp. And you can't, the driver doesn't sort the rows because it would require you load the entire document into memory, or parse it and then sort it in memory, and that could be dangerous. And maybe we should do something about that one day to at least provide that function if someone wants it. But so you couldn't go and then populate a history with this because you would add data, add these values into your history, and then your timestamp went back in time, and Niagara won't allow you to append older records to the history. So let's go on to the exports. There's two types of exports. There's a point export and a history export. The point export is a very easy way to get accurate time-aligned values. So the way the point export driver works is you first are going to go in and discover the points that you're going to want to trend. All right, so I've gone and pressed discover, and then I can go search in my station for points, and I've already discovered these. And I think if we look at the wire sheet, you'll see these points are just linked to the source point. So then the way the driver operates is you configure an interval at which it's going to write a row to a local file. You specify a directory and then a file name. And once again, you can see formatting can be used. All right, and I've specified a time format in the file facets. And so what's pretty cool is this will, every 10 seconds, add a row to the file specified here. And as soon as the day changes, it's going to start appending to a new file. So that you can see the last time I ran this driver was December 2012. And I fired it up today, and now it's adding, it's created a new file. So it's creating files, and there's a lot you can do with that. This is where you specify whether you want to append to the file or overwrite the file every time, and in its essence create a one row file, and whether or not to put a header row into there. And you can change the delimiter to visible characters. We don't support something like tab. All right. Then you want to export this in some way. So there's a email, FTP, URL exports. There's also a servlet, so other apps can come in and grab this data, and I'll show that to you last. The email export, it is what it is. You specify the interval at which you want to export it at, which file you care about exporting, all right, your email configuration, and then after you run the export, all of these, the FTP and the URL are the same. Do I want to clean up my data directory? And if you say that to true, let's say you don't want to create, use up all your disk by creating tons of files. That's what this cleanup function allows you to do. All it says is how many files to keep in the directory. You can have this run automatically if you want, or you can run it when you email it. So you have a successful email of a file, then you want to go ahead and delete what's in the directory. So that's the cleanup function to make sure you don't run out of disk space. Email, FTP, your information is here. URL is the same way. And the servlet will allow people to, you can hit this with a browser, or a web app can come in to get data. And you can see the servlet name is CSV point export, and this is what you get when you go into it with a browser. So here are all of the files that have been created. Obviously I haven't run clean, and then you can just click on it to view what's in the file. You'll notice that here we have the values and the status. That is an option. Right here, whether or not to show the status. And then also, I don't know if I mentioned this earlier, whether or not to write COV or on the interval. So this is the interval and this is COV. All right. The last export is the history export. So while point export is you discover points and link them up and create files, history just allows you to export histories, Niagara histories. What you do is you'll go and discover the histories you care about. All right, and I've already brought these in. I'm not sure if there's any important configuration on these. Uh, yes, there is some. The header name would, I believe, is going to show up as this. The status, whether or not, just like in the point driver, the column should have the status in it, and any data facets you want to apply. Or, in this case, units equals null, it's removing the units. So once you have your histories that you want to export, then you would say, do I want a header row? What delimiter do I want to use? And merge, I'll talk about in just a second. Zip single file, set that to true, and all of the histories get put into a zip and exported however you're going to export them. Now, the merge combines all of the histories into one file. So this is how you can get 5 different histories in 5 different columns. And the merge resolution, all that does is it aligns your timestamps, and this is 1 second. So I don't know if you've seen before in Niagara when you're trending, not if your interval is 15 minutes, not everything gets trended exactly on the 15-minute time, right? Sometimes there's a millisecond here or there, and what all this tries to do is even out the times so that everything will apply on the same row. You could put a merge resolution of 15 minutes, but this driver does not roll up your data in any way. So you have to be careful about that. This merge resolution can't be larger than the actual interval of your data. So once again, you can configure the email, and there's no cleanup that's involved. It just will send out the file, and you'll specify a time range on it. And the time ranges, some of them are obvious. Some of them are kinds of things we use in Data-I, for example. And the documentation covers how you can get fancy with the time range if you want. And then there is also the servlet export. And I've brought that up here. And what this shows you is the various histories that you've brought in with examples of different time ranges. So if I click on Boolean for today, there we are. And really, all that is this is dynamic, and this is helpful for apps. I could say the current 1 hour. So it just went into 3 o'clock. So we have 1 row. But you can very easily change the time range in the URL. And I wonder if we can do a merge all. Yes, we can. We'll open that in another tab. And there's an example of what a merged file would look like. And that's it. So I'm unmuting. And if you have any questions, which I actually see a question on here, so let me. So how is this driver most commonly used? It is used all over the place. I think we sell a bunch of it, and for various purposes. So for importing, I gave the theater example where it was used. We have also integrated with electric meters that have like an FTP directory on them. I can't remember. No, it's not an electric meter. It was a solar inverter. that did that. Sunny Boy, and it has like a web station or something like that. And we were able to pull their data from that. The import happens all all over the place. I know Earn Realty, their billing data is pulled in from their billing provider. So they have 80 buildings of billing data, and the driver is being used to get those into the appropriate histories. And so they get their KWH, their peak demand, the cost, and it's the electric cost, the water cost, and the gas cost for each building is in that file, and then it's shoved into a history and then used in analytics. And you know what? Another thing I didn't mention was the alarm extension. An alarm did get created in here when we were using it. So let's see, file import student union. Yeah, so if we go and look at this logic here, on these top level guys, there's an alarm extension. Remember, right click here, add alarm extension. And every time a record is accepted, an alarm is created. So you could be looking for anomalous conditions or something like that. Who knows? And so I'll unmute, and if anyone has any questions, fire away. And if there are no questions, thank you for your time.